We recommend listening to the CW Pod with a glass of Steeple Ridge Bourbon. Grown, distilled, well-rested, and bottled in Erling, Iowa. Now from the Channel Seed Studios, this is the CW Pod, fueled by Steeple Ridge.
Pod this week, and one that I'm really excited about. Dear friend of mine, I almost said old friend of mine. Old because we go way back, not because of your age, Ray. You know that, right? How are you doing, my friend?
I am much older than you, and I resemble that remark.
My buddy Ray Cole is in. We used to have some really popular segments back on the KXNO show where we talk sports media, and I want to do this more often now that we've got CW Pod going, and we'll bring Ray in for his expertise. First of all, I want to thank our great sponsor, Steeple Ridge Bourbon. It's amazing how many tweets I'm getting from you guys who are at liquor stores and Fairway, and you're looking for Steeple Ridge. This is the good stuff right here. I was just telling Ray about it off the air, that about how everything that Pat and his family does, everything from Erling, Iowa, from their farm, from the water to the grains to everything. So support a great local company. Ray, for being on the CW Pod here in person, I'm going to give him one of our Iowa Everywhere commemorative bottles. Congratulations, Ray.
Thank you.
I know that's got to – you're a Hall of Famer. You've done all this stuff. This has got to be right up there.
Man, it's like winning the lottery. Thank you.
How are you? It's been a while. How are you enjoying life right now?
I'm doing good. I've gotten off the day-to-day merry-go-round of broadcast television as of last October 1st.
Good for you.
But I stay involved. I'm involved on about a half dozen boards, some for-profit companies and a couple of nonprofits, including the V Foundation, where I've been involved since that great organization was founded by Jim Valvano at the very first ESPYs in 1993, and really proud to be involved with the work they do, trying to find that cure for cancer.
You guys have done a good job with that too. That's one of the, for a sports fan, it's been around and so long, and it's been so consistent about the branding and the marketing that goes behind it. Like, every November that's coming around, and it's really special. And then, Stuart Scott's legacy with that. And it's crazy how Valvano's his name is notorious now of all the good things that have come from his unfortunate death.
Yeah. And Dick Vitale is probably most responsible for honoring the legacy of his friend Jim Valvano. And I had the opportunity of attending the V Classic at Madison Square Garden in December. And when you see,
I saw that. Yeah.
When you see that arena, probably the world's greatest sports arena, filled with the fans from 4 teams, all around a desire to raise money for the V Foundation, is pretty cool. And it's just a great organization. Every dollar that we raise goes to cancer research, because all of the administrative and bureaucratic costs every foundation has is offset by funds that were raised separately, and the interest and earnings that are generated from that fund. So when you give $1 to the V Foundation, you can be assured that all 100 cents of that dollar goes towards life-saving cancer research.
So rare.
Yeah, very rare.
I'm on a board for a local charity too, and it's, when you look into that, I'm not trying to say that charities are bad, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of them where 70-80% is going to pay salaries and executives and stuff. And when you find one like you're talking about, those are the ones that I really like to give to.
Yeah, Charity Navigator is the best, I think.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
Charity Navigator rates most charities on how much money actually goes towards the cause. And so your listeners might want to check.
That's good to know.
So, yeah.
Well, we have a lot to talk about. Since we've done one of these, there's been so much that's happened. Ray and I have been, many of you are listening and watching on our YouTube feed. Many of you have listened to Ray and I do these sports business conversations in the past. And it was fun during the KXNO years because we kind of chronicled all this changing landscape as it goes. What I like about conversing with Ray is because Ray grew up in this business in the absolute, the peak of the mountain for legacy media.
Yeah, heyday.
Yes. I mean, when everything was rolling. I come in and I start doing the Cyclone Fanatic stuff, and I never really worked full time for a legacy media company because I jumped right into the internet, which was scout.com. I worked for Rivals for a while. Then we went independent with Cyclone Fanatic. Now, of course, Iowa Everywhere. Of course, I did work for KXNO and iHeart for a while, but that was a side thing to my day jobs. So we see things differently, but we always kind of meet in the middle and kind of, I think we can give a pretty good perspective on where we think things are going.
Yeah, I mean, I started at a traditional television station in 1976. There were only 3 network affiliates at that time. It was before Fox. It was before cable television, certainly before satellite television. And to your point, Chris, we have talked over the years, not only the change, but the acceleration of that change driven by technologies, new technologies is enormous. Knowing we were going to get together again, I looked up something that I'd seen recently, and this is actually courtesy of my friend Dan Houston at Principal Financial Group, who's an Iowa State grad. Mass adoption is defined as reaching 25% of the market, 25% market access,
Okay.
right? So thinking of you, I went back and looked at the mass adoption rate for radio. It took radio 38 years to hit 25%. It took television 22 years. It took the internet 7 years.
Wow.
It took the iPhone 2.75 years.
Incredible.
It took Facebook 2 years. I have grandkids. It took Pokemon Go 19 days
Oh my gosh.
to hit the mass adoption rate of 25% of the market.
That is staggering.
Think about that.
That is staggering. It just moves so fast.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I don't know if it's a good thing. Like here, I like to think, Ray, that I'm one of the quote unquote new school guys, but I have deep respect for the old school and I see a ton of benefits. We've had a situation covering Iowa State the last week where we could have used a lot more of the old school as far as reporting goes. And, just to be able to give your opinion. I mean, I have this problem and it's something that I've had to work on intently. I mean, I've seen therapists over this over the years. It's crazy. But when I have a responsibility when there's tens of thousands of people who are looking for your opinion on something immediately, you can be an idiot. And there's this responsibility that comes with not being an idiot and not being irresponsible. And I've been an idiot many times in my life. But it's terrifying too, because anybody can do that and it gets retweeted by the right person. And then bam, you could do something.
You're beating around the bush. That's not like you. We're going to talk about Jerome Tang and Kansas State and what happened last week.
Ray's bringing it.
Because I am old school like you.
Yeah.
And I'm older. If you're old school, I'm older school. And I watched that. And I watched it from the game broadcast and what we saw on television last week when he was upset and he walked down to TJ and the referee pushed him back into his box. And then we watched on the handshake line what happened. And he had a little sense that there were some things going on with fans, especially when he was teed up and all of that. And then to see what developed over the next couple of days. Okay, it's not old school. It is only right that if you're going to have a story out there that makes a conclusion, that it have attribution, that it have more than one source.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened there last week, Chris, was pretty disappointing because that story reached a very, very unfair critical mass in a very short period of time. And I put out, I'm not bashful, I put out a opinion on social media that said either Coach Tang or the AD at K-State needs to either issue a clarification with which has some evidence behind it, or they need to issue an apology. But for them to hide behind the faceless reporting that contributed to a horribly unfair, and I give credit to CBS during their broadcast at the Kansas State game on Kansas game on CBS on Saturday, to not only address it, but to address it in the way they did. And they addressed it probably more forcefully from the studio show than they did on site in Ames on Saturday, when they said, against the environment of the spying scandal at Michigan, you are attacking not only TJ, but the program and the university's integrity. And that is horribly unfair the way it was done.
And the part that maybe even bothered me the most is all of this happened right in front of me. So my seat is right in front of the opposing team's bench. I sit with the opposing team's media.
So you were the guy they were cursing at?
Huh? No, but I saw that. So I sit next to the managers that got cursed at, and that was my report because I saw it. Like I have all these Kansas State fans be like, "Oh, who's your source?" I'm like, "I am the source. I watched it." Like you can choose to call me a liar, but
I would retract much of what I said if I knew they were cursing at you. But since that wasn't the case, I hold my ground.
He was cursing at these two student managers that are like sophomores in college, unpaid. Like it was so inappropriate. Yeah. But I think the biggest problem I have with it is in 2024, man, there was one reporter that threw out something that fans were throwing things at the Kansas State bench. That never happened. It didn't happen. And then there was another one that insinuated that racial slurs were being thrown toward. That didn't happen. Kansas State said it themselves. And it's like, that's really damning stuff because, as you know well as I do, some of this stuff in 2024, once it sticks to you, you can't get it off.
Well, stick is the right word because much of I'm putting reporting in quotes, much of the reporting that followed that game last week was the equivalent of throwing mud on the wall to see what stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And by Saturday, in the time of the broadcast of the Kansas game, there was nothing on the wall.
You're right.
And that's where Coach Tang or his AD needed to step forward and say, we need to correct the record. And I still hope against hope that happens.
Let's start with the streaming move with the playoffs and the football. Yeah. And this was fascinating to me. I want to talk a little bit about WWE and Netflix and what we think that might mean for the future of just sports. And I know it's not a real sport, but it's still a sports property as far as these entities go. I want to talk about your induction to the Broadcasting and Cable Hall of Fame. And then also ESPN's new media rights deal with the NCAA. I have an opinion on this, and we'll get to all that. But let's start with the Chiefs-Dolphins being on Peacock. Okay, so here's my theory. You tell me if I'm right. Was that this was a deal where it almost felt like the NFL as much as, so of course NBC wanted to have it on Peacock to gain subscribers. That's a business move on there, and it did. It was historic as far as how many subscribers they picked up.
The most streamed event in the history of streaming television, about 23 million viewers.
Incredible.
Yeah. Boy, it was whatever you think of the decision, it was a very successful experiment. And it's very simplistic to say, the NFL did it, because Peacock paid them a lot of money and they wanted it to drive subscriptions. That's easy to say, but it goes deeper than that, Chris. The NFL, of all the leagues, I believe is the shrewdest when it comes to identifying trends and being ahead of the curve. And they know that younger viewers have adopted streaming as their primary source for video, right?
Yeah, okay? Absolutely.
So they wanted to see what would happen. And it's against the backdrop of a factoid that's important. If you stand back and you look at the season and the streaming numbers on Thursday night with Amazon, and then if you factor in that playoff game between Kansas City and Miami, the median age for the audience that watched those games via streaming was 8 years younger than the traditional broadcast or cable network viewership. 8 years, that's significant. So the NFL knows what it's doing. Most people saw it as a money grab. And I get that.
The money, though, wasn't that big. It was like $180 million for that game, or
well, That's pretty big to me, Chris. I mean,
not for the NFL.
I guess.
What does Amazon pay? Like $1 billion for those Thursday
Yeah,
games?
but-
This is a playoff game.
Yeah.
And it was the most visible playoff game of the weekend that they chose to put on there.
I think that's where the NFL may have been justifiably criticized the most, because that Dolphins, on paper going into the playoffs, that Dolphins Chiefs game looked like it was going to be the best game, and it was a good game.
Would that have hit 30 on NBC?
Oh, I think it would have probably hit easily over 30 million if it would have been on a broadcast network.
So my theory on it was that the NFL is giving up a little bit of money right now to they're still training us, and they're training the rights bidders and showing them, look, you can still pull these numbers on a stream. But if you don't have if you don't have the examples, how do you go to the negotiation table? Now they can say to, if it's ESPN that's going, direct to consumer, or they can look, you can still pull this number. The audience is there. That was how I read it.
Yeah. It's interesting to note, the NFL moved preemptively to renew all their deals last year. And so they now go out to, I believe, 2032. And they've already committed that they will not put the Super Bowl behind a paywall like they did that game in Kansas City through at least the end of the current rights deal. So you may see doubling up. For example, the game, 2 weeks down the road here, the game in Las Vegas will be on CBS, and it'll be available on Paramount Plus in a couple of years. I'm really happy because I was a guest of ESPN at the last Super Bowl to be produced and aired on ABC. It was in 2007 in Detroit, and 6 or 7, I can't remember, but that was notable for 2 reasons. Number one, it was the first game where all production elements of the game were produced in HD. Think about that. It's not that long ago. It was produced in HD, and it was notable because it was the last game to be presented on ABC. And with all the money that ESPN has put up since then, they weren't eligible to be in the rotation for the Super Bowl because they wanted it to have a broadcast audience. And so just like CBS and Paramount Plus will have the game in 2 weeks, when ABC comes into the rotation, it'll be simulcast on ESPN. I guarantee you when NBC gets their next one, it'll be simulcast on Peacock.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I think you're going to see a combination of broadcast and pay TV platforms, streaming platforms for quite a while.
So we got to the bottom of that. The one thing I keep laughing at, Ray, and I think that you'll get a good kick out of it too, is so many of my friends now with sports. I noticed this especially during Big 12 basketball season. So a night like Tuesday night or Wednesday night when there's multiple games going on, and they get so annoyed by having to exit their YouTube TV app or Hulu Live or whatever you want to get into the ESPN app. And now I'm going to go flip it over to ESPN Plus. And they go, man, it'd be really nice to just be able to click back and forth with all these, right? And you think back to, well, we had that. Is there any sort of consolidation coming in that aspect where you think we can do that?
Well, we talked at the outset. We talked about the technological change and how fast it is. I will be amazed if there's not a TV manufacturer out there, whether it's Samsung or LG or whoever it is, who is not going to develop a very friendly setup via your remote, where now you can flash back previous channel, on your regular lineup, cable lineup, satellite lineup. You're going to have that available to go from ESPN to ESPN Plus. It's a good example of that with basketball season.
Yeah.
And I'll be amazed if that's not something that is out there in the marketplace in the next years.
I want to buy some stock in that.
I believe, because people, I agree with you. That may be the biggest complaint. The quality of the production. I think Amazon gets high marks for what they did with the football Thursday night package on the NFL. There was some issues, with audio or video, where the production wasn't as clean as a cable or broadcast network production. I think those have been largely addressed, but the one that remains is the one you decided.
The aspect of this that's interesting for me, and I think we saw it pretty clearly on Saturday, where CBS brings its A game, right? It's A team. They had more cameras, like what, 7 or 8 camera shot, I think was what that was. You've got their A compared to an ESPN Plus broadcast. And I want to ask you, from a guy who's made these types of decisions, the ESPN Plus, to me, when I look at it, what they're trying to do is a great challenge, because it used to be, how many college basketball games were on in a week? 5? Yeah. And then it would be, okay, well, you've got Raycom and we can watch Iowa basketball and they produce it. I'm a huge ESPN Plus fan because Eric Henderson's my friend at South Dakota State. I've got friends who coach all over the country, and I can watch every game on ESPN Plus, and I love it. And for me, I give up a little bit on production quality because I feel grateful to be able to watch all of these games. What is the juggling act there as far as that goes? Because there simply aren't enough production people and equipment in the world to do it at an incredibly high level, like you see in an NFL game, or when you see a big Monday game on ESPN with Fran Fraschilla, right? This is a real challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, there's the word that comes to mind is bandwidth, and it's not just the technological bandwidth; it's also the personnel.
There's only so many broadcasters
and talent bandwidth. So, it's interesting. We bought WITV from Iowa State University in 1994, and with that, we inherited the old Cyclone Television Network.
Absolutely.
Back
Gary Thompson,
Gary,
Neil Armstrong,
Neil Armstrong,
Neil Armstrong,
John Walters.
Yep.
Well, in fact,
Murphy was there.
Keith Murphy, and then when he left us to go to across the street to WHO, John Walters stepped into that role, and then John stepped into the radio role.
Mm-hmm.
When we lost our friend and great Cyclone broadcaster of all time. So It's interesting, if you look back, we used to produce as part of this, and we developed a partnership with ESPN Regional Television instead of maintaining the old network the way they had set it up.
ESPN Plus.
It is now essentially what is ESPN Plus.
Yeah, it just was all on these cable channels.
Yeah,
right?
and it was based in Charlotte, North Carolina, not in Bristol, Connecticut.
Okay.
So we had great relationships, and we had a great network around the state, and we would produce 15 to 18 live games a season. That was a big deal. And we would produce the coaches' shows and so forth. And it was unique. And it just got to where people expected every game to be available on television. Well, now, to your point, I sort of laugh when I see people complaining about the production quality of a game on ESPN Plus, football or basketball, or women's basketball too, for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
And
because you're doing that in wrestling,
you have to stand back at some point, and you have to say, I think you just said it well. You have to be objective enough to stand back and say, I'll take something that's less than a Big Four network quality production just to be able to watch the game.
No doubt.
And you're not going to get all of your schools or your conferences. I mean, Jamie was very positive coming off the meeting that the conference had a few years ago, where they announced their deal with ESPN Plus. And the number of events that are now presented on that streaming platform, it's in the thousands.
It's crazy.
And
every night,
the scope of what is undertaken to do that is pretty amazing.
Is this simply a deal? Give me your crystal ball. Like in 10 years, 15 years, 15 is probably a little more fair. When Iowa State has a women's basketball game on, or a non-conference men's game, or wrestling, same with Iowa. I mean, we don't really know, because the Big Ten Network is a thing now, but what is that going to, are these institutions all going to need to have their own productions companies like Cyclones TV was? Or do you think that this will be farmed out more by will ESPN and Fox be making these moves? Yeah. Because bandwidth's a good word. I just don't know how much they have.
Yeah, I think in the Power 5 conferences, I think what you'll see is a continuation and an expansion of the existing approach. I don't think you'll see them go back to where the schools are doing it on their own. And I think what's going to help drive that you teased it earlier, the new deal that was just announced between the NCAA and ESPN, which essentially covered everything except the NCAA men's tournament. All of those other championship events, the depth of that agreement is amazing. And I think that the rights, that new deal was 8 years, $920 million. It's almost a tripling of what was being paid previously for the rights to those events. Now, ESPN also gained the rights to broadcast more events. So the dollars went up, but so did the number of properties that they'll have access to.
I think that ESPN got a good deal of wrapping up women's basketball for that long, because that's one of the fastest growing sports, I think, in the country.
I want to share a personal anecdote about that. So we sold our last ABC stations in Providence, Rhode Island, and Lincoln, Nebraska in 2019. I attended my last ABC Board of Governors meeting. We've talked over the years. I served on that board for 15 years, and I was chairman for 3 years. And I was the liaison from that board to ESPN for all of the ESPN on ABC properties. And so gave me more access and opportunity to develop more relationships at ESPN than I otherwise probably could have. So I'm at my last board meeting because I don't have a seat at the table anymore because we no longer have any ABC stations. So it was December of 2019. And the way those meetings work, you have entertainment come in and they do their presentation, and news comes in and does their presentation. And you have some engineering and broadcast, what we call BO&E, broadcast operations and engineering stuff. But because ESPN was essentially our in-house sports unit, ESPN would always come in last. And they did their presentation at that December 2019 meeting. And at the end, they said, "Is there any other questions?" And I said, yes. And I posed a question to my good friend, Burke Magnus, who's now the number 2 person at ESPN.
He's a big deal.
He's a big deal. Burke's a good guy too. And I said, "Burke," I said, "I have one question." I said, "When are we going to stop treating the NCAA women's basketball tournament as a redheaded stepchild?"
Mm-hmm.
Silence in the room. I don't think anybody else agreed with my assessment. But Burke responded in the affirmative. He said, "Ray, we are looking at that, and we think we can and should do more as we see women's athletics in general uptrending, and we see the women's basketball tournament in particular as we think will become a very hot ticket."
I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I would guess just in pure growth of viewership, if ESPN could give us the numbers, volleyball and softball NCAA tournaments have skyrocketed, even more so than women's basketball would be my guess.
Yeah.
Now you're starting from a lower mark,
right?
You're not demanding the same number as Caitlin Clark versus Angel Reese in the championship game, but those are growth sports.
Yes, they are.
You're looking for these little pockets where we're the worldwide leader in sports. We need to have these things. And I really do. When I was reviewing that deal, my number one thing was, I think Disney got a great deal on the women's college basketball tournament, because I think that thing is going to continue to blow up.
So let me, I brought it with me here. That agreement, as I said earlier, I think the on an annualized basis, it's like triple what ESPN it was being paid before. But
that includes wrestling. That includes
it includes all the marquee events, which would be women's basketball, softball, volleyball, gymnastics, baseball, FCS football, and more. But it also adds coverage of the Division I men's and women's tennis championships, men's gymnastics. It also gives them the rights to the men's NIT and the women's basketball equivalent, the WBIT.
Mm-hmm.
So they're getting a lot there. But I'm going to go back now, and as the late Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story about that meeting in December of 2019. So Burke responded to me.
Hold on, the rest of the story.
Thank you.
There you go.
So Burke responded to me, as I said, in a fairly positive way about what might happen with the NCAA women's basketball tournament. So now you fast forward, and he reaches out to me a short time later to say, "Ray, we've run the traps on this, and we think we have it. We have it nailed down. We're going to present every women's basketball tournament game on one of the ESPN platforms. ESPN, ESPN2, ESPNU, ABC maybe, so forth. And we're going to do that. And
That's awesome.
Starting with the 2020 tournament. And I'm going, wow, my meeting was December of 19. And so now we fast forward. We're talking March Madness on the women's side.
Mm-hmm.
Women's basketball didn't get to use the name March Madness back then, but for the women's tournament that March. And then we had this thing called the pandemic hit, and it took out the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't really happen until the 2021 tournament where they were all there. And if you look at what happened in 2021, and then the growth to 2022 to 2023, and obviously 2023 driven by Caitlin Clark.
No doubt.
And the women's Iowa women's appearance in the Final Four and an audience of 10 million. And it outdid some of the big sporting events that spring in terms of audience. And I think, and if you look at how many games, how many women's games has Fox put on with Gus calling the game? And there's one again this week with Iowa.
Peacock
Maryland.
is utilizing them as well to gain subscribers.
All of them.
And Fox has UConn and somebody this week. They're going to get Paige Buchers and doing that. The same deal that they did with Iowa. It's going to be their primetime game.
I think that was last weekend.
Oh, that was last week.
They played Notre Dame.
Okay. Thank you, Aiden. Appreciate that.
This weekend, I think Fox has Iowa and Maryland.
Oh, okay. Okay. I had missed that. Thank you, Aiden. Appreciate that.
With a former Iowa young lady as their head coach at Maryland. Should be a fun game.
I truly believe that Caitlin, and she's not alone in this, but I've spoken with her about it and she completely agreed. My read on it all along was that, guys my age, I'm almost 40. We grew up watching Michael Jordan and Shaquille O'Neal, and I couldn't act like those guys on the playground. I can't dunk. I can't dunk from the free throw line. But you know what? Little girls and little boys now, they can act like Steph Curry.
Mm-hmm.
They can work on their range. And you watch a women's game, it doesn't matter what the conference is. I like to watch the Summit League. I know a lot of people in the Summit League, a lot of friends of mine in that league. It's incredible women's college basketball. And I credit Steph for starting that. And I think the amount of little boys, too, and girls who are watching Caitlin now, and they watch the NBA, the women's game, I think it's just scratching the surface. So, like, people go, well, why don't people watch the WNBA? Because it doesn't pull the numbers that women's college basketball is. I think the WNBA is still a generation older, where it's not as stylistically fun as what the women's college game is doing, but it's going to get there. And now you have these stars, Ray. Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark, they are bigger stars than any man playing in men's college basketball. And they're influencers. And to me, when I was reading through it again, I thought ESPN was really smart to lock that down the way that they did. That might be their next Formula One property where you buy it for $1 million and then it's worth whatever it was.
Well, I was glad to see, again, when I was on the ABC board, ESPN and ABC made a tremendous commitment to carry the World Cup.
Oh, yeah.
When nobody really was following.
Yeah, they bought low.
South Africa. We went in and John Skipper was the head of ESPN at the time, and he insisted that they were going to give that event the same kind of a push that the Olympics receives. And it did an incredible number.
I remember that.
And then without even going back to ESPN, they pulled the rug out and they awarded the renewal. On the renewal, they awarded the rights to Fox, which later there was some questions about whether the charges were leveled about under the table payments and to a couple of Fox executives, and from them to people. FIFA is not exactly the cleanest organization, to put it mildly. But the bottom line is, I've seen it too often. It's what have you done for me lately when it comes to big time sports and the rights that go with those. I was really pleased to see ESPN negotiate the new deal. As we said, it's a big one, 8 years, $920 million. But nobody has shown the commitment to women's athletics that ESPN has. And a lot of people, they have their detractors and they don't like this and that about ESPN. But the one thing they deserve credit for is the commitment that they've made for 5-6 years now to raise the profile of women's athletics, and
I would
of course, nothing has stood out more in that regard than the NCAA women's basketball tournament. I think it's terrific.
Yeah, and I would credit the NCAA, which is hard to do sometimes, but I think they've done a lot of smart things with that too, like the host sites, and just that's a great tournament. I wish that somehow we could get it so the games aren't overlapping and stuff.
Yeah,
because I think that, but I don't know, how do you do that fairly? How do you do it? I don't have an answer to that. There's a lot smarter people, but
I think there has to be a way. I think that, again, I talked about what ESPN did starting in 2021, getting all of the women's tournament games on television where you can watch them. But if you remember, last year was the first year that the championship game aired on ABC.
yes.
So that they have been doing this, in a somewhat incremental basis, where they keep raising the bar. And I'm hoping that the next bar gets raised in a way where there is more sensitivity to the scheduling. You're not doing, there were, the women's game was played on Sunday between the Final Four on men's Final
Massive
Four on
number.
Saturday and
Yep.
Monday.
Yep.
But you know what else? It was a Sunday afternoon. I talked to Burke about that, and he said, we really wanted to put it in prime time, but there were issues, of all things, with American Idol and its premiere, and they didn't want to push Idol back another week. And there were reasons for it, but the bottom line is, the NCAA Women's Basketball Championship deserves to be on a broadcast network in prime time. That will be the next step, I hope.
Do you think, Ray's crystal ball, maybe this could be like a new segment on the CW pod. It looks to me, as an outsider, and I'm just looking at numbers, okay, that everything's drawing now, by the way, right? Like, so live sports we knew it was king 10 years ago. It has absolutely stepped its foot on the gas, and there's no doubt about it now. There was no bubble that we thought there might be 10 years ago. We've seen that with these astronomical rights fees and how they keep going up. What do you think about leagues like, so another thing with ESPN that they've always done is, hey, where am I going to watch the MAC game or the Conference USA, or in this case, the Big 12 now? It's not the SEC or the Big 10. What looks to me is like the rich keep getting richer. And I mean, the NFL, it looks like the NBA, whatever they end up doing, I think they're going to do some streaming probably. Looks like Amazon's in the mix there. We'll see how that rights deal ends up going. The Big 10, the SEC, those things keep getting bigger and bigger. Do you think ESPN will continue its commitment to the smaller packages? And what I mean, that Conference USA, the Sun Belt, where are these things going to be in 15 years?
Well, you used the word bubble a little while ago. I'm going to answer your multifaceted question this way. I believe that there is, for the first time, a bubble that could burst in the media rights marketplace. I think the networks and the cable companies used to sort of manufacture a bubble as a bargaining tool, ploy, if you will. But I think now it's real, and I think probably the best barometer of that is going to be the NBA rights. Both, as you know, the NBA right now, most of those rights are held by Disney, ESPN, ABC, and by Warner Brothers Discovery, which is TNT. And
it's the old Turner.
The old Turner. Okay. So they are the incumbents, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with the NBA. The NBA has made it clear that they expect the rights to double. I don't see any way in this marketplace that happens. First of all, if you look at the incumbents, Disney, certainly, it's no secret, has had significant pressures reflected in their stock price, laying off a lot of employees at ESPN and other divisions within the company. They will have to be very pragmatic in their approach. And then you look at Warner Brothers Discovery, who that merger just happened in the last year. And the last time I checked, resulted in debt of about $50 billion. So they're not going to be a drunken sailor when it comes to the NBA or any other property either. So I think what you'll see is the two incumbents probably work to keep a piece of those packages, and you'll probably see it shared with other players. And you're seeing that right now with NASCAR, for example. They had a difficult negotiation with their incumbents, if I remember, was Fox and NBC. And they spun off the Xfinity series to the CW network, a new player in sports. And
they've got ACC football. They're doing a bunch of stuff.
They did ACC football. Yeah. They picked up a little
Live Golf.
Live Golf. They picked up a little bit of the Pac-12, which is another whole story of that debacle, and how at the end of the day, the media rights is what drove the Pac-12 into no longer being a conference. So, and I sort of point that out because the Pac-12, not too many people know this, Chris. In 2013, the Pac-12 sold their media rights for a huge number. It was, they were throwing off as much money a year as any of the Power 5 conferences. And the reason that happened is because ESPN and Fox did not want to let NBC get into college football beyond Notre Dame. Okay. So they overpaid what the market probably deserved. Okay. And then the presidents of the Pac-12 schools, the old saying, pigs get well fed, hogs get slaughtered, right? The Pac-12 presidents, they were convinced that they were going to double that rights agreement in terms of the fees paid that they had in 2013. And what happened? It completely unraveled. At the end, they thought they had a deal with Amazon as their savior, and then Amazon walked away. And that literally was the beginning of the end of the Pac-12 conference.
Reminds me a little bit of the MLS too, is they weren't getting the response that they thought, and they go, okay, forget this. We're going all in with Apple.
They did. It's exactly.
Do you think we'll see more of that if a Netflix or an Amazon says, hey, Conference USA, which isn't a big number, but do you think do you see that coming?
So I made the list here. So it's interesting. The digital streaming companies essentially are Amazon and Apple and Google, YouTube, which are the same, Netflix, and they've all taken a very distinctly different approach. I went and looked up to see what each of those streaming companies has done to try to see if I could figure out what their mindset is, what their strategy is. So if you look at Amazon, it's very clear what they've decided, their approach, that if they're going to take a package of programming, they want it to be one that streams exclusively on a given night, i.e. Thursday night football with the NFL on Thursdays. Okay, that's been their approach. They want exclusive rights to a property on a given night. Now, if you go to Apple, they want to control everything. If they do it, they want all the rights. They don't want just domestic rights. They want the global rights.
And they tried to get Formula One too from you guys.
They did. And it is based, as I could tell, it looks like they're negotiating the types of deals where leagues and conferences also share in the risk. In other words, they want to give them a piece and they share in the upside, but it also minimizes the risk on the downside. And interesting, I just talked about that Pac-12 deal that they negotiated. Apple would have held all the global rights to that conference, and it would have been at a fraction of what they had been getting under the previous deal. That's why it led to the demise of the conference.
Yeah.
Google, they cut their deal. So what did Google do? NFL Sunday Ticket.
Yeah.
That was their deal. And they have really not been engaged in any other rights deals. And then Netflix, they're the most curious one because Netflix, they take the calls from all the teams and all the conferences, and yet they've yet to make a big splash of any kind where in a sport or a league where it really matters. So you look at the broadcast networks, they have to approach it differently than they have in the past. And you look at the streaming competitors, and they all have varied strategies and approaches to getting in the game. And that's why I think the bubble's going to burst here in some way from what it's been in the past. I pulled up there's an annual report that Sports Business Journal does, and it aggregates the total value of sports rights. And in 2023, it was $56 billion. $56 56. Now that's globally, $56 billion. Okay. That's going to go to 62 billion plus in 2024. And what the driving factor there is the Olympics, not just NBC domestically, but around the world. That will push that number up to the highest it's ever been. The total value of sports media rights will be somewhere around 62 to 65 billion dollars. That's a massive number. The most valuable sport globally, what do you think?
NFL.
Nope.
Soccer.
Premier
League.
Soccer.
Yeah.
The most valuable sport is soccer. Of that $56 billion.
Isn't that wild, though, living in the United States, to see how big the NFL is and to think there's something actually bigger than that?
I'm going to put it in perspective for you.
Crazy.
Globally, the media rights value of soccer is $19.2 billion. It's the most valuable sport. Now, the most valuable property, because there's a lot of soccer pieces.
Yeah.
The most valuable property is the NFL.
Soccer doesn't.
$12.4 billion. Think about that. 19.2 billion for soccer, 12.4 billion for the NFL, but by far the most valuable market, no surprise here in the world, is the United States.
So I've been reading a lot on this WWE Netflix thing, and one of the things I think I can address your bubble and I think it's simple economics. If you're Disney and I always call it Turner, Time Warner.
Brothers Discovery. It took me forever to
Turner Broadcasting
with that new name, Warner Brothers Discovery.
Well, it's simple economics. There's not as many cable subscribers as there used to be, so you don't have all this cash just coming in. There's not all this passive income that you're getting every month.
Yeah, and I'll put a number on that for you, Chris. That those paid subscriptions you're talking about have gone from about 100 million to 70 million.
Okay.
It is a very material drop off. And again, that contributes to the economics of what goes into bidding on a sports property, whether it's for a sport like soccer or a property like the NFL.
So I was reading about WWE, and they're moving its iconic Monday Night Raw. It's the longest episodic show in the world, in history. And you can laugh. I'm not saying it's the NFL. It is scripted. We all know all this, but it is sports entertainment, and it is very valuable. And they gave them like a $5 billion deal. And that includes a lot of international stuff, their pay-per-views. I think they're going to move their WWE network so it's exclusively available on Netflix. There's a lot more to it than just this show. But there are people within WWE who make the point now, Netflix has 280 million some subscribers worldwide, where our basic cable packages don't have anywhere near that.
No.
It's now shifted to like an entity like WWE thinks it can grow by being on Netflix compared to the Pac-12 thing, which was just this summer. For a sports fan, they were terrified of, well, if we put everything on Apple, nobody's going to see our product anymore. It's fascinating to me how you could look at it completely differently, but is this where we're going?
Well, all of the major leagues in this country recognize right now that they have to maintain a broadcast audience. They have to have their product be available to a mass audience via broadcast television. You talked about together. We talked earlier about the problem with switching from a traditional programming outlet to streaming outlet and the difficulty of going back and forth and what a pain in the butt it is, right? So there's another challenge that streaming has, and it has to do with the way those are sold. When I was running television stations, one of the most common complaints that I would get from viewers is the bundle, the cable bundle. They'd go, oh my gosh, I have to pay for 100 channels and I only watch the local stations and maybe 5 other.
And we all yelled,
networks.
We want a la carte.
We want a la carte. We want a la carte. That's what they cried for. And the guy says, my wife and I, we watch CNN and then I watch ESPN and she watches the History Channel and we only watch 6 or 7 or 8. And I actually saw research that bared that out, that the average cable subscriber, in addition to the local stations, only watched on average on a regular basis 7.5 networks. So there was some credence to that complaint. Now, fast forward, in the streaming world, you know what I hear people say all the time? Why can't I get a bundle? Why can't I have Amazon? And why can't I have Netflix and HBO Max and Paramount Plus? And let me pick what I want in a bundle. And it doesn't work that way. And that contributes to the churn where people will sign up for Netflix for some hot series. They'll take Apple TV for Ted Lasso, and then when the last episode of that season of Ted Lasso is over, they cancel.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the password stealing and the crackdown and going. So the streaming services have their own challenges, and they have some warts and blemishes that they've got to address
Absolutely.
as well.
And they're also dependent on internet, which I'm a rural Iowa guy. Now, granted, so like my family, for instance, in a small town in Southwest Iowa, mom and dad live in town. I've always been able to, not always, in the last 10 years, have gotten pretty good internet. They cut the cord during the pandemic like a lot of people did, and they started streaming, and now that's just what they do. And then my sister lives outside of town, and she has 3 kids. For the longest time, her internet simply couldn't handle it. They had so if you're Netflix, that I know that's not really what Netflix is thinking about, but it's still a real thing. If you look at a map of our country, a hell of a lot more rural area than there is city life. So that's got to come around too. There's infrastructure when it comes to it. It's just fascinating to me. I'll never not be fascinated in this. I'm glad that I get to live in this time to kind of watch it all move and be a very small part of it. And we need to do this more often, Ray. Do you have any? Oh, I wanted to congratulate you on your Hall of Fame induction too, as well. So the Broadcasting and Cable Hall of Fame that happened. When did you get inducted? Last year, right?
May of last year.
May of last year. That's pretty awesome. And then Jim Nantz was in your class.
Yeah, it was fun, humbling to be certain, as was noted during my introduction by Craig Melvin of the Today Show. There's been only one other Iowa native to be inducted into the Broadcast Cable Hall of Fame, and it was Johnny Carson.
Heard of him.
So when I say it's humbling, that sort of underscores that in a big way. Yeah, and the other members of the class were Jim Nantz, as you mentioned, was not just inducted, but was also recognized with a Lifetime Achievement Award. Soledad O'Brien was in the class. Rachel Ray was in the class. Al Roker, his wife works for ABC News. Not everybody knows they're married, but Al Roker and Deborah Roberts, who's now the co-host.
And here's something funny.
David Muir.
My 8-year-old wakes up every morning and watches the Today Show.
Isn't that something?
She thinks that Al Roker is the greatest human being on the planet.
Yeah, he's a terrific guy. His wife, Deborah Roberts, is a longtime journalist for ABC News, and she just named to co-anchor 2020 with David Muir on Friday nights. So it was a fun event. We had lots of friends and my family there. My boss, who just passed away of 40 years, my partner of 40 years, passed away. I was just at a celebration of life for him last week in New York. And he was one of my presenters along with George Stephanopoulos. And it was great. But, Jim Nantz was really funny. From the stage, in his acceptance remark, he called me out because I'm 5 years older than he is. And he wanted to know what the hell was going on, that he was getting a Lifetime Achievement Award, which makes him sound old. And I'm not, but again, he is so good. Small world connection there. His boss is Sean McManus, the president of CBS Sports, who's retiring at the end of March. This Super Bowl will be his last big hurrah in Las Vegas a week from Sunday. But Sean's dad, not everybody knows, is the late, great Jim McKay, the iconic sports broadcaster for ABC Sports back in the Roone Arledge days. And he was probably most famous for the Munich Olympics, where he had to turn from a sports broadcaster to a news broadcaster and literally provide play-by-play for that horrific event where athletes were killed in the Olympic Village. So I knew Jim McKay from my early days at ABC. And then to get to know his son, Sean McManus, has been pretty special. Sean is going to be succeeded by a guy you'll become very familiar with, his name, David Berson, Berson. David was a longtime executive at ESPN that I had the pleasure to work with, and he was recruited away a few years ago to be Sean's number 2 at CBS Sports, and obvious to me now that was with the understanding that he was the heir apparent, and he'll be stepping into the those are big shoes to fill at CBS Sports, and David's more than up to that.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Let's
buddy.
do it again soon, okay?
Okay.
All right. He is Ray Cole, my good buddy, and I love doing this. Anybody who's listened to me over the years, you know this is a passion point of mine, and I always learn. Ray's one of those guys where you just shut your mouth and let him talk, and you just soak it all in. So he's been our guest today. We'll have another show coming up next week. 2 Guys Named Chris coming up on Thursday morning. Thanks to our great sponsor, Steeple Ridge Bourbon. For Ray Cole, I'm Chris Williams. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, everybody.